My mother's shriek echoed off the polished wood walls of the courtroom, a sound so raw and ugly it seemed to physically stain the air. "She's a disgrace, a greedy, ungrateful disgrace." Her carefully composed face, the one she presented to the country club and her charity boards, was twisted into a mask of pure fury, her expensive pearls quivering against her throat. My father sat beside her, his face a thunderous shade of purple, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of their counsel's table. They looked like cornered animals. And for the first time in my entire life, looking at their rage, I smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small, quiet lift at the corners of my mouth, a secret I kept for myself. The bailiff took a step toward my mother, but the judge simply raised a hand, his gaze fixed not on her, but on me. He saw my smile. He saw the thick, meticulously organized binders I had arranged on the table before me. And then he spoke. His voice calm and devastatingly final, the words that would make my mother's world, the one she had built on lies and cruelty, collapse into dust around her. But I am getting ahead of myself. That moment, that perfect crystalline moment of vindication, was the culmination of a lifetime of quiet endurance and a year of silent, painstaking war. To understand how we got there, you have to understand the world I grew up in. You have to understand the polished cage my parents called a home. I'm sitting now in a sunbeam, in a cozy armchair that smells faintly of lemon polish and old books. My grandmother's teacup, thin porcelain painted with tiny blue forget-me-nots, is warm in my hands. Outside the window, a garden I planted myself is coming into bloom. It's a small garden, nothing like the sprawling, professionally manicured landscapes of my childhood. But every flower, every leaf is mine. It's quiet here. The only sounds are the ticking of a grandfather clock and my grandmother's soft, even breathing from the next room, where she's taking her afternoon nap. It's a peaceful life, a life I built, not one I was handed. A letter arrived this morning on thick, creamy stationery, the kind my mother favored. It was from a law firm, a final notification about the disposition of assets from a bankruptcy proceeding. Theirs, not mine. Reading it didn't bring me joy. Not anymore. It just brought back the memory of that day in court, the day the silence was finally broken. Let me start from the beginning. My parents, Richard and Eleanor Vance, were pillars of their community, or rather, they were obsessed with appearing as such. Our house was a monument to their ambition, a sprawling colonial with more rooms than we had people, each one decorated with an interior designer's cold, impersonal touch. It was a house for entertaining, for impressing, for being seen in. It was never a home. My father was a man who measured his worth in stock prices and the envy of other men. He was charming on the surface, a master of the backslapping, firm handshake school of business. But underneath, he was a creature of cold calculation. Love, to him, was a transaction. Loyalty was an investment. I, his only child, was an asset, though one he never seemed to find much use for. My mother was his perfect partner. She was beautiful, impeccably dressed, and utterly ruthless in her pursuit of social status. Her life was a carefully curated performance. She chaired the right committees, hosted the right parties, and knew exactly which people to flatter and which to discard. Her cruelty was a quieter, more insidious thing than my father's. It came in the form of a disappointed sigh, a backhanded compliment, a casual comparison that left you feeling worthless. She saw me not as a daughter, but as a reflection of herself, and she was constantly disappointed by what she saw. I wasn't as glamorous, as socially adept, as hungry for the spotlight as she was. I was quiet. I preferred books to parties. I was, in her eyes, a failure. My role in the family was that of the manager, the caretaker, the invisible cog that kept the grand machine running. While they were out at galas and golf tournaments, I was the one making sure the bills were paid on time, that the household staff had their instructions, that appointments were scheduled and kept. I was the one who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who bought the gifts they would later sign their names to. I did it all without complaint, because I thought that was my purpose. I thought that by being useful, I could earn their affection. It was a fool's errand, of course. They didn't want a daughter, they wanted an unpaid assistant. The only real warmth in my life came from my paternal grandmother, Evelyn. She was everything my parents were not. She was kind, funny, and had a backbone of pure steel. She lived in a small, charming house on the other side of town, the house my father grew up in before he got rich and decided his origins were inconvenient. Grandmother Evelyn saw me. She saw past the quiet, dutiful facade to the person underneath. She was the one who encouraged my love of reading, who taught me how to garden, who listened to my thoughts and dreams without judgment. She saw my parents for exactly what they were, and she wasn't afraid to say it, at least to me. Your father, she once told me, stirring her tea, has forgotten that a man's worth is in his character, not his portfolio. And your mother, well, your mother sold her soul for a front row seat at a parade that isn't even going anywhere. My parents tolerated Evelyn, but just barely. They saw her as a folksy, embarrassing relic of a past they were desperate to erase. They visited her on major holidays, a duty performed with the same enthusiasm as a dental cleaning. They'd sit stiffly on her comfortable, slightly worn furniture, making small talk and checking their watches. I, on the other hand, was there every day after school, and later every day after my classes at the local community college. I helped her with her groceries, her garden, her finances. It was never a chore. It was a sanctuary. It was with her that I learned about the family's real history, the one my father had tried so hard to bury. I learned that the seed money for his first business hadn't come from a brilliant idea, but from my grandmother selling off a piece of land my grandfather had left her. A loan, she had called it. A gift, he had rewritten it in his own mind. For years, this was the rhythm of our lives. The cold, performative existence in my parents' mansion and the warm, genuine connection in my grandmother's small house. I walked a tightrope between two worlds, becoming a master of reading moods and managing expectations. I thought it could go on forever. I was naive. I underestimated their greed. I underestimated just how far they would go when they felt their carefully constructed empire was threatened. The inciting incident, the moment the first crack appeared in the foundation of my life, came on a Tuesday. It was, like all the worst days, utterly ordinary to begin with. I had spent the morning with my grandmother, helping her sort through old photographs. That afternoon, I returned to my parents' house to find them waiting for me in the formal living room, a room we only ever used when there was bad news or company we wanted to intimidate. They were sitting side by side on a silk sofa, looking like a king and queen about to pass judgment. A man I didn't recognize, with a shiny suit and an even shinier smile, sat opposite them. "Laura, come in," my father said, his voice dripping with a false, syrupy warmth that immediately set my teeth on edge. "This is Mr. Franklin, our attorney." I sat down, my hands folded in my lap. I knew, with a sinking certainty, that this had something to do with my grandmother. "Laura," my mother began, her voice a study in practiced concern, "your father and I are worried, deeply worried, about Evelyn." I said nothing. I just watched her. "She's getting forgetful," my father chimed in, leaning forward. "She told me last week she thought it was 1985, and she's been giving money away. To the mailman, to some charity that probably doesn't even exist. Her judgment is failing, sweetheart. She's becoming a danger to herself." Every word was a lie. My grandmother was as sharp as a tack. Her memory was better than mine. Yes, she gave $20 to the mailman for Christmas, just like she did every year. Yes, she donated to the local animal shelter. But they were twisting these small acts of kindness into evidence of senility. I could see the whole sordid picture taking shape in my mind. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Franklin, the shiny lawyer, cleared his throat. Your parents are concerned that your grandmother is no longer capable of managing her own affairs. Given her substantial assets, they feel it is their duty, as her only son and daughter-in-law, to step in. They are proposing to petition the court for a conservatorship. There it was. The ugly, greedy truth. Conservatorship. A legal maneuver to seize control of her life, and more importantly, her money. My grandmother wasn't a multi-millionaire like my parents pretended to be, but she was comfortable. She had her house, which was paid off and in a desirable neighborhood, and a considerable portfolio of stocks and bonds that she had managed shrewdly for decades. It was money my parents wanted. It was money they probably needed. "We need you on our side, Laura," my mother said, reaching across the coffee table to put her cold hand on mine. Her touch felt like a spider. "You spend the most time with her. You'll need to testify, to tell the judge about her episodes, her confusion." They wanted me to lie. They wanted me to stand up in court and betray the one person in the world who had ever truly loved me. They wanted me to help them cage my own grandmother so they could pick her clean. I looked from my mother's pleading, false face to my father's expectant, hard-eyed stare. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The naive, dutiful daughter who lived for their scraps of approval began to die. A different person, a colder, clearer-eyed person, was born. They thought I was weak. They thought I was just a tool to be used. They had no idea who I really was. They had no idea what I was capable of. "Of course," I heard myself say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Whatever you think is best." My mother's face flooded with relief. My father clapped his hands together, a broad, triumphant smile spreading across his face. "That's my girl," he boomed. "I knew we could count on you." They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had declared war on my grandmother, but they had forgotten one crucial detail. I was her soldier, and I had been training for this my entire life. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the conversation replaying in my mind, the sheer audacity of it, the casual cruelty. They didn't even try to hide their greed behind a convincing facade of concern. They assumed I was too stupid or too cowed to see through it, and my compliance, my quiet agreement, had sealed their opinion of me. I was a non-entity, a pawn. Good. That was exactly what I wanted them to think. This is where the secret, my secret, came into play. It was a secret I had kept for almost 10 years, a promise I had made to my grandmother. She was far from being a confused old woman. She was a shrewd, observant strategist who had seen this day coming for a very, very long time. She had watched her son transform from a decent young man into a grasping, hollow shell, and she had taken steps to protect herself, and she had made me her accomplice. It started when I was 18. She sat me down at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and a thick, leather-bound ledger. "Laura," she said, her eyes serious, "I need you to understand something. Your father is a good businessman, but he is a weak man, and weak men are dangerous when they get a taste for money. I love him, but I do not trust him, not with my well-being, and not with what your grandfather and I worked our whole lives to build." Over the next few years, she educated me. She taught me about stocks, about trusts, about power of attorney. She showed me her meticulous records. She had 2 sets of books. One was a simple, straightforward accounting of her main checking and savings accounts, the one my father had a vague awareness of. The other, the one in the leather ledger, detailed everything else: the brokerage account in a different firm, the property she co-owned with her sister in another state, the series of bonds tucked away in a safe deposit box to which only she and I had a key. And most importantly, 5 years ago, we had gone to see her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright. There, my grandmother had signed a durable power of attorney, naming me as her sole agent. Not my father, me. She also signed a healthcare proxy and a living will, making her wishes crystal clear. We had the documents notarized and filed. We made multiple copies. I had one in a safe deposit box of my own. Ms. Albright had one. And the original was hidden in a false-bottom drawer in my grandmother's writing desk. My parents knew nothing about it. They assumed that as her only son, my father would automatically be in charge if anything happened. They assumed wrong. So when my parents delivered their ultimatum, I wasn't shocked or scared. I was furious. But underneath the fury, a cold, hard resolve was beginning to form. They had handed me the battlefield of their own choosing, the legal system, and they had no idea I was already armed to the teeth. My strategic decision was made in that sleepless night. I would not confront them. I would not show them the power of attorney. That would only lead to a different kind of fight, one of screaming matches and emotional blackmail. No, I would let them proceed. I would let them walk right into the trap they were setting for themselves. I would play the part of the dutiful, conflicted daughter they expected me to be, and all the while, I would be gathering the rope they would eventually use to hang themselves. The next morning, I went to my grandmother's house. I made us tea and sat down at her kitchen table, just as we had done so many times before. I told her everything. I told her about the meeting, about Mr. Franklin, about their plan for a conservatorship, about their demand that I testify against her. She listened patiently, her hands wrapped around her warm mug, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. I watched her, my heart pounding. Had I misjudged? Would she be frightened? Would she want to capitulate? Finally, she looked up at me, and there was a glint in her eye I recognized well. It was the look she got right before she captured a king in chess. "Well," she said, taking a sip of her tea, "it seems Richard has finally decided to play his last card, the fool." Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. "What do we do?" I asked. "We do what we have been preparing to do for a decade, my dear," she said calmly. "We let him think he's winning. We let him get arrogant. And then we show the world exactly who he is." She reached across the table and patted my hand. Her skin was thin and soft, but her grip was firm. "You are going to have to be strong, Laura. You are going to have to endure some unpleasantness. They will try to bully you. They will say terrible things. Can you do that?" I thought of my mother's dismissive glances, my father's empty praise. I thought of a lifetime spent trying to be good enough for people who were fundamentally incapable of appreciating it. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I can do that." And so, the preparation began. The first step was a call to Ms. Albright. I met with her secretly the next day. I laid out the entire situation. She listened intently, her face grim. When I was done, she tapped a long, elegant finger on her desk. "This is a classic elder abuse scenario," she said. "Financial exploitation under the guise of concern. The fact that they are trying to coerce you into committing perjury is particularly vile. But your grandmother's foresight has given us a tremendous advantage." We spent 2 hours mapping out a strategy. The first phase was documentation, absolute, irrefutable documentation. I became a scribe, a spy in my own home. I started a journal logging every conversation, every threat, every instance of manipulation. My mother would say things like, "If you don't do this, you'll be responsible for your grandmother losing all her money to scammers. It will be your fault." I wrote it down with the date and time. My father would say, "Don't forget which side your bread is buttered on, Laura. We support you. A judge will see that you are dependent on us and that your testimony is therefore more credible." I wrote it all down. I also started digging into their finances. It wasn't hard. As the one who managed the household accounts, I had access to most of their bills and statements. I started noticing things I had previously ignored. Credit card statements with enormous balances from luxury stores, letters from their investment firm that seemed to show significant losses, a second mortgage on the house that I hadn't known about. They were living far beyond their means. Their entire lifestyle was a house of cards, funded by debt and delusion. The conservatorship wasn't just about greed, it was about desperation. They needed my grandmother's money to plug the holes in their own sinking ship. I made copies of everything, every statement, every late notice, every letter. I scanned them onto a password-protected hard drive that I kept in my locker at the community college. I felt like a character in a spy novel. It was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time, I felt like I had a purpose that was entirely my own. Meanwhile, I continued to play my part. I was the picture of a sad, conflicted daughter. I would let my parents see me looking at brochures for assisted living facilities. I would ask them tearful questions about the legal process. "Will she be upset with me?" I'd ask my mother, my voice trembling. "Oh, darling," she'd say, patting my arm with synthetic sympathy. "She might be confused at first, but she'll thank us later. We're doing this for her own good." The hypocrisy was so thick I could have choked on it. The next phase of the plan was to solidify my grandmother's position. Ms. Albright arranged for a full geriatric psychiatric evaluation with a respected court-appointed doctor. We didn't tell my parents. My grandmother sailed through the evaluation, of course. The doctor's report was glowing. It described her as highly intelligent, lucid, and fully capable of managing her own affairs. He noted her deep understanding of her financial situation and her clear, rational reasons for appointing me, and not her son, as her power of attorney. We had this report notarized and filed away with the rest of our arsenal. We also took one final crucial step. My grandmother decided to update her will. Her original will had left the bulk of her estate to my father, with a small trust for me. The new will was different. She left her house and a significant cash sum to a local animal shelter she had supported for years. She left another sum to her sister. She created a small trust for me, enough to finish my education and get a start in life. And to my father, Richard Vance, she left exactly $1 for the purpose of buying a conscience, should he ever find the need for one. It was a brutal, brilliant move. And again, we kept it secret. The will was a bomb, and we would decide exactly when to detonate it. As the weeks turned into a month, my parents' arrogance grew in direct proportion to my feigned weakness. They had filed their petition with the court. A date was set. They were confident, triumphant even. They started talking about what they would do once Evelyn's situation is stabilized. It was all thinly veiled code for how they would spend her money. My mother was already planning to update my grandmother's house before selling it. My father was talking about a strategic investment that was sure to pay off. They were like vultures circling what they believed to be a dying animal. They escalated their cruelty towards me, too. Now that they were sure I was on their side, they no longer felt the need for even the thinnest veneer of kindness. My opinions were dismissed. My presence was tolerated. I was a tool, and the time for using that tool was approaching. One evening, my mother's best friend, a woman named Carol, who was just as snobbish and cruel as she was, came over for drinks. They were sitting on the patio, and they didn't know I could hear them from the kitchen. "I am so relieved Laura is finally being sensible about this," my mother said, her voice carrying on the evening air. "Honestly, Carol, she can be so sentimental. She gets it from Evelyn. No killer instinct." "Well, it's a good thing she has you and Richard to guide her," Carol replied, her voice syrupy. "It must be so difficult having a daughter who is, well, so plain. Not like you were at her age." My mother laughed, a high, tinkling sound that made my stomach turn. "You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, can you? But she's a good girl. She does what she's told. That's what matters." I stood there by the sink, my hands gripping the porcelain edge, and I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel sad. I just felt a profound, clarifying coldness. They didn't see me. They had never seen me. They saw a caricature, a reflection of their own disappointments, and that was going to be their undoing. The act of endurance was the hardest part. I had to sit at dinner and listen to them casually discuss the future as if my grandmother were already a non-person. I had to nod and agree when they coached me on what to say in court. "Just emphasize her memory lapses," my father instructed. "Talk about how she gets confused about dates. Don't make it sound malicious. Make it sound like you're heartbroken about it." I became a masterful actor. I practiced my heartbroken expression in the mirror. I learned to make my voice tremble on command. I played the role of the broken, defeated daughter so perfectly that they never once suspected the truth. I was lulling them into a sense of absolute security. The higher they climbed on their mountain of lies, the further they would have to fall. The day of the hearing arrived. It was a crisp autumn morning. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple, conservative navy blue dress. I wanted to look serious, responsible, and completely unremarkable. My parents, on the other hand, were dressed for a premiere. My father wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car. My mother was in a chic Chanel suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, her makeup flawless. They looked powerful, wealthy, and respectable. It was all part of their performance. We drove to the courthouse in their Mercedes. The silence in the car was thick with tension. My mother kept patting my knee, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt proprietary and cold. "You'll do great, sweetheart," she whispered. "Just stick to the script." I just nodded, my gaze fixed on the window. I felt strangely calm. The months of planning, of documenting, of living a double life had all led to this. There was no more fear, no more uncertainty. There was only the plan. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, all dark wood and intimidating fixtures. My grandmother was already there, sitting with Ms. Albright. She looked small but regal in a simple tweed suit. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. I took my seat with my parents and their lawyer, Mr. Franklin. He gave me a slick, confident smile. He had no idea he was about to have the worst day of his professional life. The confrontation setting was perfect. It was formal, it was public, and it was a domain governed by rules and evidence, not by bluster and social standing. My parents' power, which was based on perception and intimidation, meant nothing here. The judge, a stern-looking woman named Judge Marion Hayes, entered and took her seat. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, and for having no patience for theatrics. My parents' lawyer went first. He painted a masterful picture of a loving son and daughter-in-law, forced to make a heartbreaking decision for the good of their beloved matriarch. He called my father to the stand. My father was a brilliant performer. He choked up as he described my grandmother's supposed decline. He recounted fabricated stories of her getting lost in her own neighborhood, of her leaving the stove on, of her wild, nonsensical accusations. It was a symphony of lies delivered with an actor's skill. Then my mother took the stand. She was even better. She dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief as she described her deep and abiding worry. She spoke of her fear that my grandmother would be taken advantage of by unscrupulous people. The irony was breathtaking. Throughout their testimony, I sat perfectly still. I kept my expression neutral, my hands folded in my lap. I could feel my parents glancing at me, checking to see if I was playing my part. I gave them nothing, let them wonder. Finally, Mr. Franklin said, "The petitioners call Laura Vance to the stand." This was it, the moment of revelation. I walked to the witness stand, my footsteps echoing in the silent room. I swore the oath, my voice steady. Mr. Franklin approached me, his smile avuncular and condescending. "Miss Vance," he began, "you spend a great deal of time with your grandmother, do you not?" "Yes, I do," I said. "And you love her very much?" "More than anything," I replied, and that, at least, was the truth. "So it must be very difficult for you to be here today," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. It must be painful to have to admit that her mental state is failing. I looked at him. I looked at my parents, who were leaning forward in their seats, their faces a mixture of anticipation and encouragement. I looked at my grandmother, who was watching me with quiet confidence. Then I turned my gaze to Judge Hayes. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and ringing in the quiet room, "my grandmother's mental state is not failing. She is lucid, intelligent, and fully competent. The only thing failing here is my parents' finances, which is the real reason they have brought this fraudulent and malicious petition before the court." A collective gasp went through the room. Mr. Franklin's jaw dropped. My father's face went from confident to confused. My mother's smile froze and then shattered. "Objection!" Mr. Franklin sputtered, scrambling to recover. "The witness is being hostile and speculative." "Overruled," Judge Hayes said. Her eyes narrowed and fixed on me. "I want to hear this. Miss Vance, you have made a very serious accusation. Do you have any evidence to support it?" This was the moment, the culmination of the plan. I turned to Ms. Albright, who stood up and addressed the court. "Your Honor," she said, "we do. With the court's permission, my client, Miss Laura Vance, who holds a fully executed and notarized durable power of attorney for her grandmother, Mrs. Evelyn Vance, would like to present evidence to that effect." She walked over and placed 3 thick binders on the judge's bench and a 4th one on Mr. Franklin's table. His face went white as a ghost as he opened the first page. The unraveling began. It was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, methodical demolition. I spent the next hour on the stand, with Ms. Albright guiding me, walking the judge through the evidence. I presented the report from the geriatric psychiatrist, confirming my grandmother's competence. I presented the notarized power of attorney, signed 5 years prior. I presented my detailed journal, logging my parents' attempts to coerce me into perjury. Then we moved on to their finances. I presented the copies of their credit card statements, showing their astronomical debt. I presented the letters from their creditors. I presented the evidence of the second mortgage on their home. I showed the court a detailed analysis prepared by a forensic accountant Ms. Albright had hired, demonstrating that my parents were on the verge of bankruptcy. Their income did not support their lavish lifestyle. They were insolvent. With every new piece of evidence, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew colder. My parents' confident posture began to crumble. My father was sinking lower and lower in his chair, his face a mottled gray. My mother was staring at me, her eyes filled with a dawning, horrified comprehension. This wasn't her timid, compliant daughter. This was a stranger, a cold-blooded executioner. The final piece of the puzzle was a short video. Ms. Albright had it set up on a screen facing the judge. It was my grandmother, filmed 2 weeks ago in her living room. She looked directly into the camera, her voice firm and clear. "My name is Evelyn Vance," she began. "I am of sound mind and body. I am making this statement because I am aware that my son, Richard, and his wife, Eleanor, are attempting to have me declared incompetent in order to seize my assets. They are doing this not out of concern for my welfare, but out of their own financial desperation. I have appointed my granddaughter, Laura, who I trust completely, to manage my affairs should I ever become unable. My son has not been a part of my financial life for over 20 years, by my own choice. I do not trust his judgment or his character. Any claim he makes to the contrary is a lie." When the video ended, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. My father had his head in his hands. My mother was shaking, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. She finally understood. She had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and publicly humiliated by the one person in the world she had never, ever considered a threat. That's when she snapped. She leaped to her feet, her chair clattering backwards. Her manicured finger pointed at me, shaking with fury. "She's a disgrace," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "A greedy, ungrateful disgrace. After everything we've given her. She did this for the money. She wants it all for herself." The bailiff started forward, but Judge Hayes held up her hand. She looked at my mother's hysterical performance, then at my father's pathetic, crumpled form. Then her eyes settled on me, calm and collected on the witness stand. I met her gaze, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself that small, quiet smile. The final judgment came swiftly. Judge Hayes looked down from her bench, her expression one of utter contempt for my parents. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice like chipping ice, "please sit down and be silent, or I will have you removed." My mother, stunned into silence by the judge's tone, collapsed back into her chair. Judge Hayes continued, "I have heard the testimony and reviewed the evidence presented here today. The petition for conservatorship over Mrs. Evelyn Vance is denied with extreme prejudice. This court finds that Mrs. Vance is not only competent, but remarkably astute. This petition was not brought out of concern, but out of avarice. It is a shameful abuse of the legal system and a disgusting attempt to defraud an elderly woman." She wasn't finished. She picked up one of the binders, its contents detailing my parents' financial lies and their attempts to suborn perjury. "Furthermore," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level, "I am not a fool. The evidence presented by Miss Vance suggests a number of potential criminal offenses, including attempted fraud, conspiracy, and perjury. I am therefore referring this entire case file, along with the court transcripts, to the district attorney's office for immediate investigation." That was the final blow. The district attorney. Criminal charges. It was over. My father made a choking sound, like he couldn't breathe. And my mother just stared blankly for a moment, and then her eyes rolled back in her head, and she slumped sideways in her chair, a dead faint. It was the most dramatic, self-serving thing she could have done, but it was too late. The curtain had already fallen on her pathetic little show. The aftermath was swift and brutal, a perfect storm of their own making. The collapse of their world was more comprehensive than even I could have imagined. The district attorney's office moved with surprising speed. The judge's referral, combined with the mountain of meticulously organized evidence we handed them, made their case an easy one. My parents were indicted on charges of attempted fraud and conspiracy. The perjury charge was harder to prove, but the others stuck. The legal consequences were just the beginning. The news of the hearing and the subsequent criminal charges spread through their social circle like a wildfire. My parents, who had built their entire identity on the foundation of public perception, were suddenly pariahs. The phone calls stopped. The party invitations dried up. People they had known for decades would cross the street to avoid them. My mother's friends, like the sycophantic Carol, dropped her instantly, not wanting to be tainted by the scandal. Their social death was quick and merciless. The financial ruin followed close behind. As soon as the investigation became public, their bank froze their accounts and called in their loans. The second mortgage on their house went into default. The business partners my father had spent a lifetime cultivating deserted him overnight. No one wanted to be associated with a man under federal investigation for trying to defraud his own mother. The house of cards didn't just fall, it was obliterated. They were forced to sell the mansion. The proceeds were immediately swallowed up by their creditors and legal fees. They sold their cars, my mother's jewelry, the ridiculously expensive art they'd bought to impress people. Everything they had valued, everything they had used to measure their worth, was stripped away. They ended up in a small, cramped rental apartment in a part of town my mother used to sneer at. The fall from grace was absolute. About a month after the hearing, I received one final, desperate call from my father. I was at my grandmother's house potting new geraniums for the window boxes. His number flashed on my phone, and for a moment I considered not answering. But I knew I needed to close this door myself, once and for all. "Laura," he said. His voice was different. The booming, confident tone was gone, replaced by a thin, reedy whine. "Laura, you have to help us. Your mother, she's not well. This has destroyed her." I said nothing. I just kept scooping soil into a pot. "We made a mistake," he continued, his voice cracking with a desperate, unconvincing show of remorse. We were under a lot of pressure. We weren't thinking clearly. But you can't let this happen. We're your family. You could talk to the DA, tell them it was all a misunderstanding. You could help us financially, just until we get back on our feet. I finally stopped what I was doing. I took a deep breath, the scent of fresh earth filling my lungs. The rejection I was about to deliver was not born of anger or a desire for revenge. It was a simple statement of fact, a boundary drawn in stone. "No," I said, my voice calm and even. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "No? What do you mean, no?" "I mean no," I repeated. "You are not my family. Family doesn't do what you did. You made your choices. You built your life on a foundation of lies, and it collapsed. That is not my responsibility. You will not contact me again. You will not contact your mother again. If you do, I will get a restraining order. Do you understand?" He started to bluster, to threaten, to plead, the words tumbling out in a pathetic stream. I didn't listen. I just pressed the end call button on my phone, and then I blocked his number. I closed the door on that chapter of my life, and I never looked back. Which brings me back to today. I'm sitting here, in this sunbeam, the lawyer's letter on the table beside me. It's the final notice of the bankruptcy. The last remnants of their fake empire have been sold for scrap. My parents pleaded guilty to lesser charges to avoid a trial, and they received a sentence of probation and community service. A public humiliation, but not a jail cell. I am fine with that. Their prison is the life they now have to live, stripped of the status and wealth they worshipped. They have to live with the knowledge that they were brought down by the plain, sentimental daughter they so thoroughly underestimated. My grandmother stirs in the other room, and I hear the soft shuffle of her slippers on the hardwood floor. She comes into the room, smiling, her eyes bright. "Is that tea still warm?" she asks. "I'll make a fresh pot," I say, getting up. Life is good now. It's simple, but it's real. I finished my degree and started a small business, a landscape design company. I specialize in creating beautiful, sustainable gardens for people who don't have a lot of space. I'm good at it. I love making things grow. My grandmother and I live together in this small, cozy house I bought with the money from her trust and the profits from my business. It's filled with books and laughter and the smell of baking. It's a real home. There's someone new in my life, too. His name is Ben. I met him when he was the contractor I hired to build a new deck on the back of the house. He's kind and he's honest, and he has a slow, easy smile that makes me feel safe. He loves my grandmother and thinks my passion for soil composition is fascinating. He doesn't care about a family name or a fancy address. He cares about me. He sees me. He is the complete opposite of the world I came from. He is a symbol of my new beginning. Sometimes, when I'm out in the garden with my hands in the dirt, I think about the central lesson of it all. I think of something my grandmother told me years ago, long before the storm broke. We were looking at a pair of massive old oak trees in the park. "Look at them, Laura," she said. "They look so powerful, don't they? But some trees grow too tall, too fast. They put all their energy into their leaves, into showing off, and they forget to grow deep roots. The tallest trees with the shallowest roots are the first to fall in a storm." I didn't fully understand it then, but I do now. My parents were those trees, all glittering canopy and no foundation. They were brought down by the first strong wind. And me? I was the small, quiet plant they never bothered to notice, the one who spent years growing deep, strong roots in the dark. And when the storm came, I was the one left standing. The sun is warm on my face. It's time to go put the kettle on. The future is waiting.